Hello, and welcome to Ask the Stuttering Foundation. Today, our guest Kathy is a school speech language pathologist who works with teens who stutter. And we're going to explore a number of issues related to teens and helping them in the school and outside of it. Kathy, thanks so much for reaching out to the Stuttering Foundation. And could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and then we can get into talking about teens who stutter.
Sure. I've been a speech therapist for 31 years, and stuttering students have increased a lot in the past, probably 10 to 15 years. I basically work with the high school population. I had middle school population for a while, which felt a little easier to work with than the high school population. But I do work with a variety of students, with learning disabilities, other health impaired, speech-only students, so a variety of students. But like I said, my population of students with stuttering disabilities has increased quite a bit in the past, probably, like I said, 5 to 10 years for sure. And then, of course, with working with the high school population, that's where the majority of students that I've been dealing with, like I said, and it's just, they're a challenging group, but they're fun, but they're challenging.
So how many teens, high school students do you have on your caseload currently who stutter?
Currently this year I have 2. And I have 2
Gotcha.
more that I think really probably should be on my caseload, and I'm working with that.
Okay. And what years are they in school?
My 2 students are sophomores, and the other 2 are freshmen.
Okay. And so that includes the 2 that are on your caseload and 2 that you've noticed and would like to work with. And do you know the reason why they're not on your caseload, those 2 that are not?
It seems like I work in a private high school, so it seems like by the time they come to the private high school, it's like, I don't know, I don't think it's noticed as much, and it's also they came from private schools. So I don't think they've noticed it as much as when I used to work in the public schools. I think it was more obvious, not obvious, but I seem to have a higher caseload when I was in the public schools than when I was in the private schools.
Okay. And when you're working with the 2 that you are seeing, do you work with them together or do you see them individually?
I see them individually just because of scheduling purposes. We do try to get together occasionally, though, but their schedules are both so different, so that's why it makes it more difficult.
So you wrote in a number of really wonderful questions about working with teens and some of the frustrations inherent in that. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about that, and we can get into talking about that, or we can talk specifically about the clients you have now, whatever works best for you?
Well, I really have enjoyed, like in the past 5 to 10 years, how it's not just the fluency, to look at the aspects of their attitude, what's their behavior, what's their cognition, to really kind of look at the whole student. And so many times by the time I get them in middle school or by the time I get them in high school, they don't like the stuttering, so the attitude is poor. But then they also don't want to do anything about it. But when I try to look through a lot of the videos to try to use encouraging speech to have them, learn more about what the speech is, a lot of times by the time I get them in high school, the elementary and middle school teachers have done a fairly nice job of talking about what stuttering is and things like that, so that there's not a lot of that cognition type stuff that I need to go over. They're aware of it, but so I look for videos, and I either find videos with really little kids doing activities, and of course my high schoolers aren't interested in that, or I find people in their 20s and 30s who are saying, I really learned that communicating is what's important. It doesn't matter how I communicate. However, as I had mentioned, my high schoolers do think it's important, and they don't like that they're stuttering. And it's like, so these videos are difficult to show them because they're kind of like, yeah, I see them, but it doesn't apply to them. And so it's really hard to work on their, motivation. It's like they don't like it, but they don't want to work on anything. And they know the strategies. They know the tricks. They'll say, I use slow speech, or I start and I stop over. I mean, they know the different things, but they're not doing them. And I just would like to see something with the high schoolers, that what they're going through in the videos, or, different talks to help the students.
Okay. So you're thinking about one, they're teenagers, and while they clearly know that they stutter, they may know whether they'll share it or not, that it gets in the way of communication. But then when it comes to that shift to doing something about it, then there's a reluctance. There's perhaps a lack of motivation, or their motivation is at a pretty early stage, or they really don't have a reason to pursue right now therapy. And maybe that's could be about the experiences they've had in the past, and they feel like I've learned tools, I've learned techniques, I know that stuff. Perhaps those things don't really work in real life spontaneous communication, and maybe take cognitive resources away from really engaging in communication and interacting with their peers and all the things that teenagers really want to do. And they know that they're not fluent, but they really don't want to think about that first and foremost when it comes to communication. They just want to talk to their friends, right? And then on top of that, they're teens. And what I like to say about teens is they all want to be unique, but none of them want to be different. So as a result, they can say, yes, I stutter and it's okay. And yet, I hate it. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to show it. And therefore, I cope by interacting when and where I can, how I can, maybe even hiding the stuttering, choosing not to talk at times, choosing not to raise their hand in class, choosing not to volunteer for things that involve speaking. Maybe when they're with their peers at the lunch table, allowing everybody else to keep on talking, wanting to add something to the conversation, but holding back because of the fear that when they do speak, even if they have been with the same peers for years and they all know they stutter, etc., that personal desire to show or not show the stuttering is so much a part of that, right? So another aspect of that is, so what's the goal? What is therapy from us supposed to be all about? And as you said, you've made a shift in recent years to focus more on communication as a whole, right? But sometimes that's a hard, well, what exactly does that mean? Where do the tools fit in there, or what are the tools? And the core of it is communication comes first, message, saying what you want to say, when you want to say it, where you want to say it, to whom you want to say it, and saying exactly what you want to say. And of course, stuttering gets in the way of that. So you end up with kind of you're torn between talking openly and potentially stuttering and showing it, and either carefully choosing your words or using a variety of tricks or avoidance strategies to work around it. Maybe passing as fluent, as a typically fluent neurotypical person. And yet, in order to do that, you have to not say what you want to say, suppress the stuttering, or use a whole host of tricks. And high school students are among those who will tend to say, I would rather fit in and be as fluent as possible and not have anyone know that I'm different, even though I know that makes me unique, than you want me to show my stuttering and I'm supposed to be okay with that? That's a huge flip, isn't it? And then, as you said, they watch the videos. And of course, the videos are other people talking about their experience. And teens are also very me, myself, and I focused because they have enough that they're contending with.
Yeah.
They can be relatively insecure as all their systems develop and they're going through puberty. So there's a lot of self-focus, one blemish on the face and they think it's like a huge spotlight that everybody
Right.
sees and focuses on. It can ruin their whole day.
Right.
So one stuttering instance that they show may have that same impact. That impact may be internal. I feel embarrassed. I feel ashamed. I feel less than. I feel different. I feel frustrated because I can't talk the way they can talk. Or it can be a projection from what they think their listener is thinking, which is, he can't talk right, he's stupid, he, whatever it might be, flawed, whatever the perceptions might be, or that the listener is having to wait for me. They can talk quickly and easily. It's all easy for them. And for me, it's really hard. Now, we know that those teens on the other side, the listeners, they're also focused on themselves and not necessarily focused on the stuttering or anything else about the teen who stutters. But that's not the way it might feel internally.
Right.
Getting back to, you said the ABCs. So the A, the affective or emotional. So I just hit on some of the emotions that they might be experiencing. And then the B, which is the behavioral. And we used to think about the B as stuttering or fluency. So one or the other, and what is it like? Frequency, duration, severity, that sort of thing. But the B is also what you do to try not to stutter, and what you won't do or don't do so that stuttering doesn't show. Okay. And that's all understandable. It's all coping. And then the C is the cognitive, and you mentioned attitude. So it's the thinking, but it's also that thinking, they think I'm stupid, they think I'm less. And it's usually very one-sided. It's all or nothing. Either I'm bad, flawed because I stutter, or I'm good and it's easy to talk and communicate because I don't. So one of the ways of getting at that is to acknowledge all those things and to talk about the behaviors. And it's often good to start there, like, so what are your tricks? What are the things that you do to keep from stuttering or to avoid stuttering? You know, do they throw in other words? Do they change things up? Do they put in interjections? Do they pretend that they forgot what they were going to say or that they're thinking? Do they leave the situation? Do they, when they think they're going to be called on, drop their pen on the floor and dig around so the teacher won't call on them? All of those are tricks or avoidances. And we as speech pathologists can acknowledge that those are pretty creative. And then make a list and then say, okay, you could even rank order them. And then you could let's talk about the pros and cons of those. Okay. And an adult who stutters, who I met at a support group meeting, talked about something that's always stayed with me called the stuttering tax. And basically her notion was, when she held back so that she wouldn't show the stuttering, it was like being taxed because she didn't communicate what she wanted to say, and that was taken from her, like a tax takes our money from us as well. And teens can really sort of lay out those pros and cons. And then you might ask me, okay, but then how do we go from there to actually changing the behavior, right? Because I can acknowledge it all day long, and I can acknowledge it with Kathy because she's a speech language pathologist who knows, who cares about me, who gets it. But she's not out there when the teacher calls on me and I can't get a sound out. And there's this silence, this pause that seems to take forever, and I turn red and my heart starts beating and all those kinds of things, and I feel badly. And perhaps somebody might giggle or sigh or fill in or show impatience, or maybe I'll just perceive that they might. That is really, really hard, and we can acknowledge that. And then the next step is to say, okay, so let's talk about a typical day for you. What are all the situations that you are in with other people? where communication does happen or could happen. And let's lay that out. And let's look at all the different things that might happen in there. And where are you communicating now?
Mm-hmm.
So the next thing is to build on what they're already doing well. And a lot of times people forget that, right? When we look at our flaws, we forget that we have any gifts or anything that we do well. And teens are especially good at that because of that sort of all or nothing thinking. And so, where are you already communicating and saying what you want to say, or at least most of what you want to say, or using the fewest of those tricks? And with whom and in what setting? And then we can say, okay, what if you took the next step? What would you be saying? What would you be doing differently? What trick might you let go of? It could be with a parent.
Mm-hmm.
It could be with a sibling. It could be with a best friend. It could be someone they don't know at all, because some of them are going to say, I'd rather talk to a stranger who I'll never see again. Great. Let's pick up the phone and make some phone calls. Okay. And so to build on, when can you communicate a little bit more exactly the way you want to, stuttered or not? And so the win is that I communicated.
Mm-hmm.
I said my name. I said that word. I didn't use that trick during that sentence. It can be a single sentence. When I picked up the phone, I said, hello. What are your hours? What hours are you open today?
Right.
Something like that. I might have stuttered through the whole thing, but I did it. And I could hang up after that if I wanted and say, check, win.
Right.
And start to accumulate those wins and start to see that. So that's one way of kind of getting at the communication. And it's being more open to stuttering. As you know, Kathy, when we talk about things like the stuttering iceberg, right? So what's above the water is what will show. And what's below the surface is everything that we've pushed below the surface, we're not allowing, we're not showing. And we can acknowledge for our teens that, I get it, that's coping. Nobody wants to be laughed at. Nobody wants to feel embarrassed. And then the other side of that coin, or that con sheet, is that I had this great joke I wanted to share at the lunch table. I didn't dare because I was afraid I was going to stutter. And for some teens, not all, it resonates with them that not only did that keep you from communicating what you wanted to communicate, your friends didn't have the advantage of hearing that great joke.
Right.
So they also lost out. Probably not as important. Although for some people it is, especially those that are more empathic and want to really please others, right? So that's a way to get at that. Interestingly, the more we suppress the stuttering, when it shows, it can be more severe in those moments because you're fighting it so hard, holding it back so much that there's so much tension and struggle there. Once you start to let it out a bit in situations where you feel comfortable doing that, and with the support of others like family members or friends or teachers, certainly your speech language pathologist, and you can positively reinforce those opportunities like, wow, you stayed with that word and stuttered on it, and I know exactly what you wanted to say. I typically tell my clients that when they're with me, whether it's on the internet or in person, that I'd like them to say every single thing they intend to say. And I'll wait. If it takes 10 minutes, that's going to be a win. Whatever it is, and then to reinforce it. And it's hard to let go of that. And sometimes they'll start to beat themselves up a little bit, like, oh, I used that trick again. Oh, and then it's an opportunity to say, yeah, those are so well learned that they just automatically come in there. And that's to be expected. And that's why we pick an action plan or a specific opportunity or situation to try something out and spell it out quite exactly, because that will help them to say, this is exactly what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, how I'm going to do it, what I'm going to say. And then to look back at it and say, did I do what I intended? Check.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can talk about, where does stuttering come into that? We're not stuttering phobic, right. But if we want to welcome it, and ironically, the more you allow it and decrease the suppression, the avoidance, the tension and struggle, the easier and more effortless it becomes, without having to pull in some of those more traditional techniques, right? Although those can certainly be useful when a person wishes to use them and how they wish to use them. Just as if you're giving a formal speech, you'll speak differently, pause differently than you would just hanging out with a friend and chatting. So it's almost a code switching kind of a thing that you can do, pulling in or pulling out any tools that you choose to use as well.
What I've sort of been running into has been, they're fluent with me. And so it's like we spend our session together and we don't hit on anything, because it's not a chance to say, oh, good, you worked on that sound, or good job, you communicate your thought. And I've asked a couple of my students, and they'll say, well, I'm comfortable with you. Well, I appreciate that. I'm glad that you're comfortable with me, but we're not getting for the situations when you're not comfortable. So like, I've pulled students in that they don't know, and I'll say, hey, especially when I had my senior 2 years ago, it was like, you're going to be meeting people in college, so what would you do in this situation? Let's have a little, you're sitting next to each other in class. And I mean, that's helpful, but I don't know. It's like, I just feel like as I'm working with them, that's great that they're comfortable with me, but then we're not getting a chance to say, but what do you do when because if I say, okay, pick a time, like, in the car ride home, and my one student was funny because he just said, he goes, my brother doesn't want to hear me talk anyway, so it doesn't matter. I was like, because I said, well, maybe that would be a good time to talk, just pick a time that that you're going to make an effort on the things that you do. But like you said, his big brother picks him up from school, so it was kind of funny. But in general, I'm like, I'm not there then to remind them if that would be the time, or if it's at supper time, or maybe they say, math class is where I struggle the most. Okay. I'm not there with them to say, okay, go ahead and, try. And the teachers, they've got a lot on their schedules that they can't always be, whatever the cue is or whatever the code is. Most of my teachers, I've never had any difficulty with my teachers, fortunately, that don't deal with our stutters. They all deal very well with them. So I'm proud of my teachers for that. Because I know there's some teachers that aren't, but that's okay. Everybody learns differently. I've gotten fortunate that I'm with a good group of teachers. So sometimes I feel like I don't know how then to say, when you went out then with the soccer team the other night, and you went home by yourself because you didn't want to go to the pizza place, because you were nervous. It's like, how do I get you to understand that that's okay, to try it, things like that. So that's what I'm saying. So it's great that they're comfortable with me, but then I feel like they're not learning anything to use when they leave my space.
So Kathy, thank you so much for those questions and that very clear explanation of what stuttering is really like for people who stutter in general and for the teen clients that you see. And a couple of really important issues in there. One is that they tend to be quite fluent with you in the therapy room. You're someone they know, someone who knows they stutter, someone who accepts their stuttering. And so they may be fluent or pretty close to it in that environment. And that's very, very different from everyday real world communication and conversation, as you noted. And one of your clients not going with the soccer team out for pizza because of worries about communication is a perfect example of that. Or I like the one of the young man who has a chance to talk with his brother on the way home, who picks him up, and his brother's not interested in what he has to say. That might make it a little bit easier to talk, but is not an ideal communication, right, interaction, relationship sort of a situation. So that tells us that right from the very beginning, we need to be building in those things that take the person or have the person do what they need to do outside of the therapy room. Now, in some settings, like in where I've worked in university and private practice kinds of settings, I can go out of my office with them and do all sorts of things all over the building and all over the campus and things like that. Mm-hmm. In the school setting, there are some restrictions on that. There are probably some places you could go. You could go talk to people in the main office, mm-hmm, or to different staff in different places or prearranged kinds of things. And that's an opportunity. But it's not the same as that everyday communication, which is really where you want to help. Mm-hmm. So that is why really getting an idea of when they communicate, where, with whom, what it's like, and getting that very, very, very detailed from them is a good starting point to really spend the time to get that background. What's a typical day like for you? What's a typical weekend day like for you? Or you could even say, when do you like to communicate the most? When do you like to communicate the least? Or with whom is it easiest to communicate and with whom is it hardest? And just really nail down the variables that are associated with that. And that gives you an opportunity to really explore. So you're taking that first step and helping them, mm-hmm, to become their own clinicians. And that is the main point, mm-hmm, so that it's no longer your responsibility to cue them, to ask them to do something, to remind them, or the teachers or the parents or anyone else. Because as long as that's the case, then it's always external rather than internal. And so you want to say, you know what, you're in high school. You're headed for adulthood sooner or later, right, and college and whatever in the future. And now is the time for you to take this all over, mm-hmm, and take me out of the picture. I want you to make me unnecessary. Mm-hmm. And the way that we're going to do that is for you to become such an expert on everything about your communication, both what you do really well and what's really a challenge for you, and then start to bridge the gap. And I'm essentially going to be your coach on the sidelines, mm-hmm, like your soccer coach. Yeah. And you're going to need me less and less, but I'm going to be here because I'm always somebody you can talk to when you have a rough day, or when somebody is responding in a way or asking you questions or something's going on, mm-hmm, that I can support you. But let's get you to a point where you're in charge. And let's say you see me because you happen to stutter. But the reason you really see me is that stuttering gets in the way of how well you communicate. Mm-hmm. If stuttering wasn't getting in the way, you wouldn't be here, right, stuttered or not.
Right.
Okay. And sometimes people will say, oh, it's all okay. You know, I communicate well, like the two that aren't on your caseload currently, right? Everything's fine. I'm doing fine. And they might be. Mm-hmm. Other times they just need a break from therapy. They just don't want to think about it right now. Now is not a good time. All you have done in the past with them and your being there open to being seen is huge. Because you could say, yeah, that's your decision. Mm-hmm. I'm here if you ever need anything. And if you don't, that's fine too. It reminds me of a story of a former colleague who stuttered. And when I first met him, he talked about having a therapist in high school who was the first time anybody ever said to him, in here, you say what you want to say, stuttered or not. Mm-hmm. And he felt that acceptance and he started to think, wow, my goal in life doesn't have to be to get rid of my stuttering. There might be another way. And yet, as a high schooler, he continued to hide. He continued not to apply what he knew. So there was that disconnect, which is quite understandable between, right, I know it's okay that I stutter and I'm going to let it out there. And then later when he got into college and met some other people who stuttered and really started to think, maybe I can look at this a different way. that he started to do more. But he credits his high school speech pathologist for planting that seed. And he said that he regretted a little bit not to be able to go back and thank her, to say, it was probably frustrating for you because I got it, but I didn't do the things that I knew from what you were telling me would be the best next steps. But that planted a seed that later helped me to make the changes I needed to make. So that's also a part of what you're doing. You're giving them possibilities, you're giving them information and knowledge and ways of thinking about it that are planting seeds that might not germinate till later. In general, those small steps are what get our clients started on that path to change. And for some people, it's smaller steps and just a few of them. For others, it's one after the others, and some of them are taking leaps and bounds. When you have the opportunity to group people, which, when you have people hit or miss and lots of different schedules, that's hard, then they can learn from each other and support each other and grow together. It also can become quite competitive, so that also can help raise the bar. And there are organizations out there that, whether different kinds of summer camps or organizations like Friends that have annual meetings where kids of all ages and the veterans from Friends as well come together and do lots of things. It's very supportive. Camps are very supportive as well, where you can just be yourself for a week. And for a long time, I started a camp at Vanderbilt University called Camp Talks, and had some students who would come year after year after year, and it was so much fun to see them change over time. One particular teen who's now a freshman in high school, he was really quiet and not so interested in coming. His parents made him at first, right, in elementary and middle school. And then over time, and all of a sudden, in the midst of COVID, he made the switch and said, okay, I'm taking this on, I'm changing it, because what's the alternative? I don't communicate, and I'm frustrated all the time, and I don't show who I am. And now all of a sudden he's the big leader.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so, it's hard. Sometimes we only see what's happening in the moment, and for the short amount of time we're with people. If we could see it all in the rear view mirror, that would be really, really helpful. So a couple of things in there. One is that, stuttering happens in the real world. And clients need to know that, and they need to take ownership of that, because you can't be, nor do they want you following. You could offer, you could say, I'll follow you around all school day and remind you. How would that be? Would that be helpful if I said, say that word, go ahead and communicate it, tell that joke? They probably wouldn't want that. So you need to take it on so you won't have Miss Kathy following you in the hallways, or your parents, or anyone else. And then they can also bring in others along the way. So who do you want to educate about stuttering, and what do they need to know? And how do we do that? And where do we start? And you have lots of ideas, but always ask them, what's your idea? I've got some ideas, but I don't want to impose my ideas on you. What works for you?
Yeah.
And that way it's okay, I'm stopping this role as leading you. Now I'm going to coach you from the sidelines, and you're going to need me less and less over time. And then you'll come to me when there's something you want to talk over, or a situation that's come up, or when you just want some support. I'm here for that. But you're going to be running that ball down the field, or kicking that ball in the case of soccer, right? And that discussion of, wow, so it's totally understandable that you didn't want to go out with the team, because why? What happens in the restaurant when you're with the team and trying to communicate? Yeah, that's really, really hard. And yet, then you miss an opportunity. Go ahead, Kathy.
I was gonna say, I think I like the idea. I think I still feel like at the high school level, I'm supposed to be teaching, and I think I like that idea that it's like, yeah, we're shifting gears here. It's like, and I think that's a good way to think of it because so many times the parents will come to you and say, well, we want the child to be fluent. Well, I get that, but but it's a good way too to approach with the parents of how to say, you know what, we want to start shifting gears, and they want to start taking the responsibility for it. And it's because, like you say, I'm sure that student went to that camp because mom and dad made him go. We have something similar here where I'm at, and I try to encourage my students to attend it. And like I said, some of them go, I went because my mom said I had to go. So you do get those. But at the high school level, I think I still feel like when I was at the middle school level, where I'm still teaching, and really trying to help them understand how to be fluent. And I think you're right that at the high school level, it's not so much you know it now. Now let's break the situations down so that you're doing it, not necessarily, it's not you're sitting in my 30-minute session or 40-minute session, and we're practicing strategies. You can do that. But it's looking at those situations. I think that was a good point that I think I wasn't thinking about at the high school level.
Great, great. I'm glad that's helpful. And it really does take that off of you. People can be such passive learners
Mm-hmm.
and sort of enjoy that because then they're along for the ride and they can check in and out as they want. Kids these days, it
Mm-hmm.
sound like my parents or my grandparents, they're so savvy about the internet and all things social media. You could say, I don't even know what's out there for teens who stutter. Next week when we meet, you give me a rundown. I
Yeah.
want you to show me what you found out there and what you liked and why you liked it and put it on their
Yeah.
shoulders. And then if they walk in and they haven't done it, a couple of things could happen. Sometimes when people don't do what they planned or what I asked, I'll say what got in the way because
Mm-hmm.
that rather than is negative, but it says, all right, what got in the way of that we can talk about, or say, okay, do it now. I'm gonna work on some other things over here. You get to work on that on the computer there, and when you're ready, we'll talk. And if you don't finish it now, we'll do it next week.
Yeah. It's a
So that
good point.
this is still your responsibility. I'm not going to go, well, some things I really like
Yeah.
are, and sometimes it takes a little while for them to um, make that shift
Mm-hmm.
to being more responsible. But once they do, then it tends to take on a momentum of its own and build from there,
And
which
I
can be
think
really
that's where
helpful.
the kids need help in high school. As I said, I think so many of us, I know myself, like I said, is more, we'll be fluent in 5 out of 10 situations or whatever, your IEP goal that you make. And it's like, it's not that anymore. That's why I like the ABCs. That was nice, but I felt like I was still kind of floundering with that a little bit. But I understand what you're saying now. It's like I said, yeah, let's shift the focus. It's on them because that's then where it starts to develop for them because that's what they need. It's like you said, I'm not going to walk around all day long with you, nor would you want me to walk around all day long with you, or you want your parents, anything like that. So, yeah, start taking the ownership. And it's not so much skills anymore now, it's take that ownership of what to do with those skills. So, that makes a lot of sense.
You mentioned parents and helping the student. And now, some parents are going to come directly to you, and that's fine, but helping the student to have those conversations or conversations that you can have. And one of the things to say to parents quite directly is your son or daughter is in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Stuttering isn't going to magically go away. He's not going to grow out of it. That's hard to
Mm-hmm.
think about. I think you know that deep inside. And yet, there's still a desire for your child to be typically fluent like neurotypical speakers, like people who don't stutter. And quite honestly, it's not realistic. And it tells the child, unless you're fluent, you've failed.
Right.
at therapy. And as speech language pathologists, we can feel that way too, unless they're fluent or very fluent,
Right.
more fluent, whatever. Then we have failed them because we haven't done our teaching well enough, our instructing, excuse me, our modeling, etc., well enough for them to do it. Well, stop chasing fluency.
Right.
This child stutters. Now, as a parent, you might take a different tact and say, do you think your child is going to outgrow stuttering? And they might say, well, I hope so. Do you believe it? Well, probably not. Okay. So let's say, and statistics would show probably not.
Right.
Okay. So if stuttering is going to be a part of what your son or daughter struggles with, has as a challenge, deals with when communicating, what if we took a different approach and stopped trying to make him fluent and instead try to get rid of the struggle, the tension, and all of the things that he does to try not to stutter or to keep from stuttering? And he's given me a whole list of those. Do you ever notice? Blah, 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 blah. Maybe that could be a conversation the teen is a part of, but depending on the level of it, and it might be one that you want to have one-on-one with parents. But it's really a mind shift, right? And it's a mind shift that we make as speech language pathologists. I'm not dealing with a 3-year-old, okay, who might naturally recover. But even for my 3-year-olds, well, what do we do in the meantime? Well, we maximize communication. And if they naturally recover, great. And if they don't, well, then we have established a solid foundation for the future.